The Hyksos are ruling Egypt for about 200 years, and as you might expect, the Egyptians don't particularly appreciate being controlled by a foreign government. They also don't appreciate paying taxes to a foreign king. Good. In the mid-1500s BC, the people of Egypt rise up in revolution against the Hyksos. They are led by a man named Ahmose of Thebes. That means he's from the city of Thebes. Ahmose actually helps overthrow the Hyksos, leads the charge against the Hyksos in a lot of ways, and they successfully overthrow the Hyksos and drive them out of Egypt. Ahmose then declares himself the next king of Egypt, and this begins something called the 18th dynasty. That's the 18th dynasty of Egyptian rulers. Ahmose becomes the next king, and this also begins the New Kingdom time period. Mid-1500s. The New Kingdom is particularly significant because we consider this to be sort of the golden age of Egyptian history and civilization. This is the point at which they reach the height of their military power. They reach the height of their empire and their wealth and their grandeur, essentially. And so the New Kingdom is definitely a golden period for the Egyptians. Does anyone have any questions before we move on? All right. So you need to make a note of this. The New Kingdom lasts from about 1550 BC to about 1050 BC. Yes, I do expect you to be able to tell me the years of the different eras in Egyptian history. Now, the people of Egypt, having been subjugated by the Hyksos, now fear foreign invaders. It's not enough to have natural boundaries against invaders anymore. They aren't immune to foreign hostility. And so what the Egyptians do is they start seizing, taking territory, places where people could invade from, strategic locations, basically, so that they would have a buffer and a defense ready against any foreign invaders coming through those locations. While doing this, they end up establishing their own empire. They expand their territory to the north. They take the homeland of the Hyksos. In Southwest Asia, they expand further into the south, taking parts of what we call Nubia, particularly the civilization of Kush. They take over that territory as well. And so they've expanded pretty far by that time. By 1400 BC, Egypt's the leading military power in the world. Their empire reaches from the Euphrates River in Mesopotamia all the way south to the southern portion of Nubia. Nubia is a region along the Nile River, for anyone that's not familiar with that term. We will talk a little more about Nubia and Kush when we come back from Thanksgiving break. So that is something that we discussed this chapter in relation to ancient Egypt as well. Do any of you need more time with this? Or do you have any questions? That's fine, Brianna. So, the Egyptian Empire has extended pretty significant distance, and the New Kingdom is this golden age height of the Egyptian civilization. Now, we're going to talk about a few pharaohs, two in particular, that I want you to be familiar with some general information about them from the New Kingdom era. And the first is Hatshepsut. Queen Hatshepsut, in fact, which was relatively rare for a woman to rule as pharaoh. Hatshepsut is actually Ahmos's granddaughter, if I remember correctly. She has a pretty strong claim to the throne, except she's a woman. Um, in fact, she was married to a man that we know as Thutmose II, who was Pharaoh of Egypt, and also her half brother. This is something that happened in Egyptian history, particularly in the royal family. Um, Thutmose II was the child of a secondary wife to the previous pharaoh. Hatshepsut, however, was full royal blooded, and so in order to strengthen Thutmose II's reign, they had Hatshepsut at the age of 12 marry her 15-year-old brother, Thutmose II. And so they were married, and it strengthened his claim to the throne to marry her because she was a fully royally blooded. They had one daughter together, but she did not produce a male heir for Thutmose II, and then he died rather suddenly at about the age of 31, if I remember correctly. No, Curtis, they do not have pharaohs in Egypt in the modern day at all. Egypt is currently a republic. They're a modern civilization. They have a republic. Like, this is ancient civilization, ancient Egypt. So try not to get those things confused. Things are very, very different in Egypt today in comparison to thousands of years ago. So Hatshepsut doesn't have a son when Thutmose II dies. And she is considered Pharaoh's great wife, meaning the chief wife of the Pharaoh. However, pharaohs often had multiple wives, and one of his secondary wives has a son, Thutmose III. But the child is too young to rule when his father, Thutmose II, dies. Hatshepsut ends up ruling in his stead, at first as a sort of a steward of the throne, someone who's just kind of a placeholder. But eventually, Hatshepsut declares herself as king, as pharaoh. And I do mean that she uses the term king to refer to herself. In fact, she takes control of the country as a pharaoh does and rules as a pharaoh does. And she also presents herself as a male in a lot of the art, imagery, and statues of her from that time period. Mostly this is to legitimize her rule. It's frowned on for women to rule in Egypt. Women in Egypt had more rights than women in other places like Mesopotamia, but they still aren't typically in government positions of that nature. But she is the daughter, wife, sister of pharaohs. So she has a pretty strong claim to the throne, and she uses that. The headdress that she's wearing is a traditional headdress that Egyptian pharaohs often wore. It's a symbol of their position and power, basically. It's pretty common, actually. If you look at the death mask of Tutankhamun that they found, he's also presented as wearing a similar headdress. So Hatshepsut presents herself often as a male, as a king. There are pieces of art that present her as in female clothing and all of that, but in order to legitimize her reign and her control over the country, a lot of the art does present her as being a male ruler. A lot of people did frown on Hatshepsut. However, there were people who supported her, advisors and nobility who supported her as a pharaoh. And a lot of that is because she was a good ruler. By all accounts, Hatshepsut was competent and capable as a ruler. She even led the army at times, led expeditions far to the south that were very lucrative. And so she did earn a level of respect. This is another depiction of Hatshepsut, again, appearing as a male in this. So at first she's a regent to Thutmose II, the third. Then she ends up declaring herself actual pharaoh rules as king, not as queen, as king. Um, and her reign was prosperous. She was good for the country. It was a stable time. By all accounts, she was an excellent ruler. She died in, I believe, in her 40s of bone cancer. They found out from her mummy years and years later. Her stepson, Thutmose III, about 20 years into his reign, as far as we can tell, actually started having the monuments and records of Hatshepsut destroyed. It's debatable as to why actually he did that. Scholars believe he did that because of spite, resentment, because she ruled in his stead while after he was an adult. Um, However, he never tried to overthrow her while she was in power. He didn't try a military coup, even though she made him a general of her army. And so it might not have been that he really resented her. Some scholars think that he was just trying to erase the record of there being a successful female ruler of Egypt in order to deter women later on and from trying to do the same thing. So we'll probably never fully know why Thutmose III tried to erase Hatshepsut from the record, but he failed miserably to do so anyway. Statues still exist, although he did destroy a lot of her statues and monuments. Many did persevere and survive, and we have a relatively solid record of her. Does anybody have any questions about Hatshepsut? Hatshepsut? Her mummy was actually found in 2007. If I remember the story correctly, it was in the wrong tomb. It wasn't in the tomb that was marked for her. But they discovered that it was her mummy because they were able to match a tooth that was labeled as being hers that was in the tomb intended for her. It was like in a box and it said Hatshepsut and it was a tooth. They were able to match that to a mummy that they found in another tomb in the Valley of the Kings. And so they discovered that that was actually Hatshepsut's body in 2007. And that's when we found out, like, she died of bone cancer, too. Terrible way to go.